Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the one and only Real Talk presented by Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton. Of course, I am Shana, and we welcome you to our live edition. It is Monday night, July 1st. Happy July to everyone, and we've got a great topic for you tonight. You don't want to miss it. If you're live, we're going to get your questions in. We want your questions in tonight because we've got a great topic, and the topic is talking about blended families. That's right. America, there's so many splits, there's so many divorces, there are many breakups. You have the right, of course, and the freedom to move on. And of course, you should. And what does that look like when you have children or friends or family that perhaps really liked your ex partner or spouse? Or whatever the case may be, we're going to talk about it. All bets are on tonight. We're going to have real talk for real people. I'm no expert on any of this, but I'm so excited that we have someone that is an expert on families and blended families. It's the one and only, the acclaimed family therapist. We have Tenelle Jones on with us. Tenelle, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me as always.
You on always. And we have a tradition here on Real Talk where we ask our exclusive guests 2 minutes or less to tell us what drove them to get them where they are today. Your resume, your CV is super impressive. You've helped so many people, hundreds, if not thousands of individuals move on in their life with different tragedies or transitions. But tonight we're talking about blended families. But what motivates and pushes you to help people become the best version of themselves?
I think just knowing that they can be the best version of themselves and just wanting them to remember who you are, in a very spiritual sense, like remember why you're here. And it's definitely not to stay stuck in suffering.
Yeah, so key. And the suffering part, I think so many people we know, as my grandmother would say, if you live long enough, you're going to experience the downside of life. But I know as a family therapist, you work with many children, family dynamics, also couples. You believe that there is light on the other side, right?
Of course. I can't be doing this work if I didn't believe in it.
But you also say for many people, it can look different. So what works for Shana may not necessarily work for Tanel. Explain.
Well, we all come from different backgrounds and we're individuals and we have different cultures. And so within that and different core beliefs based off of our upbringing. So of course you're going to want to tap into who you are at core and identify what's most important to you. And then that's how you find somebody else to connect with as well.
Yeah, I love that. It's all about connection, connecting with yourself and others. But let's get right to it. We're talking about blended families in 2024. I think one of the biggest things when people think of breakups or divorces, of course, they tend to think of the children, right? So after a while, they're saying, I'm done, I've moved on, the ink is dry. Maybe they've had a few weeks, few months, maybe some years to themselves. Tanel, you and I've talked about that at the top of the segment before we went live about knowing when to get back out and date again or have friends or meet. But when it comes to children, people that still have kids, and I'm talking about if they're 5 years old, if they're 14 years old, you are a family therapist, an acclaimed one, a certified one who's worked with so many people. For that parent or that guardian that has a child or maybe a grandchild in their custody, what would you say should be the first thing they sort of think of when they say, I'm going to get back out here and I'm going to get a friend or a partner interested in dating again romantically?
That's a really good question. And it might be still might be different for different people, but I would say this, right? So you have several different relationships happening just within your own space. You have the relationship with yourself that you have to be in tune with. And so where are you? What's happening with all of that? If you had a previous relationship, is it you have to grieve that? And then you have a parenting relationship, right? Now, the relationship you had with the child's other parent, that is still not the same as the relationship with co-parenting with that other parent. So you want to make sure that there is really good connection and communication there, because as you probably know, Shane, and seen the dynamics between two parents who are no longer together, if there is toxicity in the way that they communicate and engage, it can transfer to the new relationship. So work through all of those things before you decide that you're ready to date, because you want to be able to go to that new relationship confident and certain that the past won't impact the present.
And I love that you're talking about the past not impacting the present. We're on with the one and only Tenelle Jones. She is an acclaimed family therapist. She's worked with so many people. You're watching Real Talk presented by Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton. I'm Shana, of course. We want you to give us feedback tonight. This topic affects millions and millions of people. Almost everyone I know is a part of some blended family in some capacity. You've always wanted to speak with a therapist one-on-one, ask a question. Hey, all bars are on. Tonight, here you go. We have Tenelle Jones on with us. She's an acclaimed therapist. Get your question in. Thank you so much. We see you, Sunshine. Loving the topic. Thank you. Thank you. Let's ask specific questions or general questions about blended families. Even if you're happily with someone right now, if you've had something that happened in the past or something you've thought about with your own child or your next door neighbor, get those questions in. I want to ask a real question for real people, though, Miss Jones, right now here on Let's Talk America. You said you want the past to be cleared up before you move on. You and I both know that sounds great. It sounds ideal. But one of the things I hear so many experts like you say, you can only control yourself. Shana can only control Shana, right? You can't necessarily control and sometimes not even impact or influence a former partner or spouse on how they may respond or they may act moving forward. What should someone do in that case? Because maybe he or she, he's tried everything. He's tried to be cooperative with her. He's tried to really talk things through, but she continues to want to be toxic, right, with the children, not being accepting of perhaps the father moving on. Where should that person go? Because you and I both know, Miss Jones, you'll be waiting 25 years if you're waiting for the other person to say, well, they're going to get on board. Help us out.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about for the kids and you don't necessarily know what your rights are, please seek legal counsel. I think sometimes maybe the assumption is that if you're not the primary parent, if you haven't been involved in a kid's life, that you can't, be involved now. So I would always tell people to seek legal counsel, get rights, go through the courts if you need to, if it's centered around the care of your child. But I want to kind of know this might be veering off, but I think also, and we've talked about this before, Shana, like this concept of grieving a new change is so important because there's so much that has changed and will continue to change when you leave a new relationship and enter another one. And so that means what is it that you need to recognize? What is the loss? How do you let go? What is it that you want to be different in your new life? And so that also can help with the transition as well.
Yeah, I think that is so key and trying to remain positive as well, right? That is going to be very, very important. Let's talk about the children, right? Let's talk about, and not just young children, because I've heard many people have lots of friends who've been divorced and split and they have children with previous people. And a lot of it looks positive, a lot of it looks healthy. Everything is not always toxic, right? But let's talk about when you do have the child, maybe they're 17 years old or they're 33 years old, right? And they have not really accepted the fact that mom and dad are over. Or maybe somehow, and I think a lot of times parents have to be realistic and also understand that children can somehow, I don't want to say be fanciful, but have these ideas that if they work hard enough, perhaps mom and dad can get back together. For that parent that wants to obviously make their child happy and healthy, how should they deal with that if that 31-year-old son is not on board? He doesn't want to meet any of mom's new friends or her boyfriend. He's not hearing it because he wants them back with her dad. Or maybe he didn't necessarily want mom and dad back together, but he's got some idea of what's going on with mom moving on with her life. How does a parent handle that? Because I think that becomes perhaps so complicated for so many men and women wanting and deserving to move on with their life after a breakup.
Well, so if it's an adult child, um, I think it's okay to validate your adult child's emotions and thoughts about the situation and just remind them that they have a life to live and it's okay that they feel this way. But then you also focus on your life, especially if they are adult. If they're adults, right? You don't have to continue to make changes for them. And here's the thing, we know this, I see this all the time. People don't like change for whatever reason. That's all we're constantly doing is changing. And so there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in that space. So all you can do is continue to communicate to your children, your adult children, like what's going on with you, that you are happy or that you are content, but also set boundaries around that, right? Because you're still, in a space where you're their parent and they're your adult child, and you don't have to tell them everything.
That's a good point. And I think that's so key because you said something that can come across so harsh to people. You said they're an adult child, and at some point, and I'm paraphrasing you, you have the right to live your life and you don't have to tell them everything. And I think sometimes, and we know this, parents, likely our generation, Generation Xers, want to be close to their children. Perhaps they didn't always see that with their own parenting relationship when they were young. And so they want to set a new standard and they want to reveal and share, and they want their son to share with them. But you're saying there also comes a point, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're saying with a parent has to move forward and live their life. And it's not saying you're dismissive of what the adult child may be thinking or even the younger child, but you're saying there are boundaries that parents and children have to have, right? And I would imagine that's called a healthy mentality.
Yes, definitely. So, and with the younger children, it will definitely be different. The conversations, obviously younger children, um, they're still, some of them are still developing, I'm certain. So you would have different conversations with them and help them in the transition. And so with adults, and people, sometimes people go to family therapy to really try to work through this, to resolve it. It's just being able to set boundaries. Like, just because you're family don't mean that you don't need to have boundaries and, be independent in who you are, and also encourage them to be independent. But I think the key thing, and Shana, is always validate people in what they feel. They're their feelings. I tell people all the time, your feelings are true for you. It just doesn't mean that they're factual for everyone. And
Yes.
so you're more than right. You're more than welcome to have them. But that doesn't mean I have to own them. And so
Yeah.
just making space for that with people, I think, can be very valuable in transitioning and just dealing, like I said, dealing with the change and uncertainty.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point because you're bringing up that people deserve the right to be seen and heard. And that's a two-way street, right? Certainly when it comes to children and giving them the confidence that mom or dad are listening. But it also says that, you have the right to your opinion, right? And I'm just modeling this. Let me know if this is healthy.
Yeah.
But mom also has the right to move on with someone that makes her happy, right? And as much as your opinion is valued and appreciated, mommy's going to be happy with someone that's healthy for her. Because I want to say the obvious, right, Tanelle? Children, and they can be 15 or 23, doesn't necessarily mean that they are experts in the love lives of moms or fathers, right? I mean, we joke and we can be lighthearted with our kids, but when you've got 55 years of experience, as
Yeah.
much as you want your 18-year-old son to like your new partner, that may not always be for the right, or I want to be fair, logical reasons. I mean, are you liking them because they're healthy for mom or dad, or you like them because someone bought you a gift or bought your favorite a lemon pepper wings? Am I right or wrong?
Yeah. That's That's right. Yeah, just being able to, like I said, talk through it. It's just like with your friends. You don't necessarily have to believe or listen to all your friends. So the same thing comes with your kids. Now, if there's grave concern because they see that you're hurting and they can verbalize that, then I would obviously believe that maybe they have a very good concern about your safety. But if everything is going well, and like you said, Shana, this is a healthy relationship, it's just the loss piece. And so recommend that they get that support in transition. We call it grief recovery. It's very valuable to anybody for any age. And it just helps people process the changes that are happening and how to move forward with their lives.
And I love that you're talking about grief recovery because I think so many times when we hear the G word of grief, in our minds, we think of someone dying, right? We think of mom, dad, or grandparent. But let's be real. When you talk about the D word of divorce, when you talk about the breakup, there is a loss that took place. And I've interviewed so many experts like yourself. And even when the relationship was toxic, right? Because let's be real, you broke up for a reason. Doesn't mean it was always toxic, but you broke up because you grew apart or something was no longer working for you, you're healthy. But even when it's unhealthy, I've had experts tell me, but that person is still grieving the loss of something that's familiar. They were together for 3 years. They were together for 15 or 20 years. So you do have to allow yourself to process the grief of it. Because I think so many times when you think of abusive relationships, right? When you think of emotional or physical, and so many times people will say, "I can't believe she's crying, she's upset. He was horrible to her. He was unfaithful. He was mentally abusive." But the experts like yourself would say, correct, but that doesn't mean she didn't love him. Is that right? Is that verified?
Yes, that is very verified. Like, right. So, and here's the space where, if we're talking to America, like, we have to be able to create space for compassion, empathy, and understanding. And your journey may not be someone else's journey in their relationships. And so, instead of just automatically just condemning and judging, invite people in, become curious about their decisions. And that's a really good way of how you can support them. If you come at a person like, you don't need to be with this person and blah, 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 they're not healthy, they're going to shut down and not going to be open to your support anyway. So learn how to approach people if you do have concerns about something they're doing in a very curious and open-minded and open-hearted way, and not necessarily just telling them what to do.
That's a great point, because I think so many times people can become defensive as well, right? And that's why they'll stop sharing information, because friends mean well, but then it's like, why are you going back to her? She doesn't want you. And then they start closing down. And I'd imagine you would say this as a therapist, but help me out. You certainly want people to have an avenue where they can communicate and vent. Is that fair?
Communication, yes. Venting, no.
Okay.
But
Okay.
and I say venting. Venting is just kind of like this negative energy that's just placed upon the people in the same space that you're venting to. And
Yeah.
there's no discussion about how I want to grow, how you need to
Okay.
grow. We're just venting, and we want everybody to be on our side as if we're always right. If we're never able to look at another perspective but our own,
Yeah.
that is not a healthy space to be. And I imagine that you're going to struggle in any relationship that you have if you're only able to see your perspective.
Yeah, that's such a great point. You see why she's the expert, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. You are watching Real Talk, presented by Let's Talk America podcast. I'm Shana Thornton, your on-air host and producer, and I can produce and I can write and I can host, but I am no expert when it comes to relationships and family therapy. But we have the one and only, the acclaimed, very well respected international therapist with us, family therapist Tenelle Jones is on with us. So excited to have her on. She's based out of Charleston, South Carolina, a beautiful city, and so excited. We've got some questions and we've got some comments, Miss Jones, and we're going to continue our conversation, but we certainly want to acknowledge everyone that is watching us tonight. Thank you. Thank you. If you've got any questions, general or specific, let us know. She's going to tackle it tonight. We've got Miss Sunshine saying she loves the topic. Thank you. Doris out of Atlanta said, what a great topic. She gave us a heart. Thank you so much. We have Glenn out of Atlanta Metro saying blended families aren't easy. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's touch on that right now, Miss Jones. We have a gentleman saying they're not easy necessarily. And I want us to be as positive as possible, but I think he's saying the obvious. It's the elephant in the room. They're not easy. They don't have to be complicated, but realistically, I know you work with children and work with families who are blended and who've tried to make it work. For so many people, is the experience easy, middle of the road, or it can be pretty difficult?
I think it depends on how people get to that space where they are, right? If it's a relationship where there's infidelity and you fall in love with somebody else and you cheated on my, you cheated on my mama, those types of things they're gonna evoke high emotions, right? It's gonna
Yeah.
be a very emotional space. But if it's something else and it's just like a relationship ended and you meet somebody else, then here's what I would encourage people to do. This is coming together. So now it's a new type of, I would say, business. So as much as you can, sit down, have conversations with people about the values that are going to be important to you guys within this family. Let everybody share how they want to be in the same space with each other. Really talk about what that looks like behaviorally. I always tell families, I think I might have said it before, like have a vision for yourselves as a blended family that, again, it's inclusive of everyone. What is the mission that you want to have within this new family, and what are the values, and be mindful too of what are the triggers, like what are the things that might get in the way of us being this wonderfully blended family,
Yeah.
and have those open conversations. You cannot, most people come and see me and they say, I need help with communication. And I'm like, what does that mean? So you have to be able to use your words. Our body language is important, and talk through things. They're not going to work themselves out if you are avoidant of conflict, or not wanting to be a burden to anyone, or not
Yeah.
wanting to have anybody express sadness or anger. So
Yeah.
make space for all the emotions that are gonna naturally come up when people are connecting,
Okay.
because again, there's loss and change on all sides, but also really getting to know, if there are younger kids involved, get to know them, get to develop your own
Mhm.
relationship with them, and not just do it through the biological parent. Like really try to connect with that kid, and
Yeah.
understand why they are hesitant, right?
Yeah. That's a great
And
point.
accepting you as in that space. Yeah.
And that's a great point. And let's talk about something that's real. Real talk for real people. Monday night, we're talking about blended families, divorce, broken up, children by different individuals. You have the right to move on and be happy. We all believe that. Ms. Jones has been on with us before talking about dating and finding new love. But when you have children, but when you have a mother, but when you have a brother who happens to really like your other spouse or other partner, where does that leave you? We're talking real issues for real people. But you did say something about having the relationship somewhat independent, building a bond separate from the biological parent. You and I both know there are many people, mothers and fathers, who split from the individuals that may be the parent. They move on in the relationship. They can be somewhat protective, perhaps for different reasons, saying, as I get to know him, as I get to know her, I want to be mindful. Or let's state the obvious now. It's real talk for real people, Miss Jones. You're a therapist. We're going to go here. There's always the element in the back of your mind, this may not work. And I do not necessarily want my child to be attached to a gentleman or to a woman that I'm no longer involved with. And they're asking a year later when perhaps someone has moved on to somebody else. I think that's something a lot of people don't discuss, that's real, that keeps a lot of parents who have a lot of potential from really becoming close to people thinking, well, the marriage didn't work. The last relationship didn't work. What promises this does? Come on, it's a real question, right?
Yeah. And so my thoughts are right in this space. Again, it's going to be different for everybody, but depending on the age and development of your child, you can take your time to introduce that kid to that person. That is okay, to figure out if it's something that is going to be meaningful for you, before you share that with your child.
Yeah,
And here's the thing. I know that sometimes parents want to protect their kids,
yeah,
but some exposure to some challenges can be helpful,
that's
right?
right.
We are not going to escape this planet.
That's right.
You're either going to know somebody who's hurt,
That's
you're
right.
going to feel hurt. We're never going to escape this planet from feeling any type of hurt. And so, as a
Mhm.
parent, you want to protect your kids from being hurt. And I definitely am like protect them from the potential
Yeah,
trauma, whatever that is. But having people come in their lives, that's going to be something, again, if you live long enough, you're going
that's
to
right.
lose friends, you're going to make friends, you're going to lose coworkers, you're going to, and I think some level of that can be very healthy depending on how it's done and what is said. And so I don't want to say avoid it completely, because avoidance is never healthy, but just recognize that there are steps to that, and it is okay.
That is such a great point. Thank you. You're watching Real Talk. Tenelle Jones on. She's an acclaimed family therapist, relationship therapist, working with children and families and blended families. And I talked about people not wanting their children to get hurt, so you don't necessarily introduce them to people. But she said, obviously, you want to use safety measures. Take your time, depending on the child's age as well. But you made a valid point. We're not going to escape life without hurt. That is a valid point, and there are a lot of teaching lessons that come from that. And you said something that I think a lot of mothers and fathers don't necessarily think about intentionally. Even when you do break up from somebody, that's life. Because who goes through life never breaking up with a significant other, partner or boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife? That I mean, and let's be real, that's just being realistic. Your high school sweetheart is not necessarily, sorry, I'm not hating, but not necessarily is going to be who you may end up with 20 years from now. So you do have to be resilient. And I think you're so right that one way we teach and build resiliency is allowing them to also face the truth of things. And that's even with divorces and breakups. I mean, when you see, which is to me a little weird, when you have parents like, shh, don't tell them we're divorced. Shh, don't tell them that we're breaking up. I think you have to be realistic. Children are smarter than we want to believe, right, Miss Jones?
Especially
They
this
they
day and age, yes, of
they know.
course. They
They know
know.
when mom and dad aren't getting along.
They
Even if you're not arguing, they know the energy in the room, you're not speaking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they do. They know all of those things. And I want to add something too. If you do introduce your child to someone, be honest. Don't say this is your Uncle Ted. If it's really somebody that you're seeing,
Not
like
the uncle.
give
No.
them the, don't give them those uncles if you're that's not okay.
Yes. And you're saying just, and even if you take it, so this is dad's friend. This is my friend. Even if you go there and we're going to see where the relationship goes. But you're right. don't be dishonest about the relationship.
Yes. Don't
Correct.
be
Because we want
realistic.
them realistic in the world. Someone, we have Latrina. We have Latrina. Thank you, out of the suburbs of Atlanta. She says it takes a lot of work and willingness to make blended families work. True or false? I'm sure that you just explained that for the last few minutes, that you have to be intentional about the success and also being realistic that there can be some bumps in the road.
Yeah, you guys can become a wonderful puzzle, but just know that the puzzle, there's so many different pieces, and you're going to have to maybe put some pieces in the wrong hole before you recognize that's not where it goes. And
Yeah.
again, if you are blending a family, you want to have everybody at least try to get on the same page about what's important and how you want to be in this space. And that means you can't just be a child stays in a child's space, because I think that's something that used to be wonderful when we were in my generation, but
Mm-hmm.
now because children are exposed to so many different
Yeah.
things, you want to include them in a way that they don't have to go outside of you guys to get
Yeah.
extra support, or they're going to find out the information, so you
That's
want
right.
to be the one to talk to them in the
That's
way
right.
that's going to be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're truthful with your own child and not having their friends or social media be dishonest with them. And so they're getting confused, because we have to set the truth out and we've got to shape that as parents. Doris out of Atlanta Metro, thank you so much. She said, accepting change isn't always easy. And I want to harp on that a little, Miss Jones. She's talking about that, but not just for kids, for adults. Let's transition into the conversation with your mom really liked your ex partner, right? And you've moved on, you're happy, but mom keeps saying, well, why aren't you calling so and so, right? Because I think one of the things that, if anybody's ever been through divorce, they know this: the grief is not just you. The grief is not just your children. It's not just your ex-spouse or ex-partner. The grief is also mom and dad, cousins, best friends, who also built a relationship with your ex, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say. And that's why that grief recovery for everyone is going to be valuable. And they don't have to do it with you. That's just something that you, again, as long as you're open and honest and say, and validate that person. I get that you had a relationship with that person. I understand that this is hard for you. Let me just remind you where I am, and the reason, if you want to share the reason with your parents,
Yeah.
the reason that you're making a different choice for yourself, and how they can continue to support you. I think it's, you know, nobody's a mind reader. So whatever support you do need from your family, just let them know, like, this is the way I need you to support me as I continue through this
Yeah.
change. Because like you said, it is very difficult. I don't know why people struggle at change, because our brains are constantly activated to be in that space where we're on the lookout for change. But change is going to happen. It is okay, and you can thrive in it, not just survive or struggle in it.
I love it. We can survive and not, we can thrive, not just survive and struggle. And I love it. I love it. You're watching Real Talk, presented by Let's Talk America, with host Shana Thornton. I'm Shana. So excited to be on it. I have the acclaimed family therapist. She's worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of families and individuals coping through things, being the best versions of themselves. The one and only Tenelle Jones is on with us. Vicky out of Atlanta says, tell me more. She's going through this. What one tip, if you could give her, of transitioning where there is a child, an adult child, or a younger child, really having a hard time accepting, even when it's been a while. What advice would you give her out of Atlanta, or any of us?
Yeah, I think if you have an adult child that's struggling, get to understand why. I think sometimes they could be worried about their own life, like, right, oh gosh, if my mom and dad didn't make it, the relationship I'm in now, is love real? A lot of people would question that, right? If they see, especially if you've been with their parent for 20 years and now all of a sudden you're going. So I think that's something that we also don't think about. A lot of people start to develop anxiety about their own lives if their adult parent has not made it through their relationship, right?
Yeah.
Little kids might also have their own different fears or anxieties, like, will I never, especially if there's another parent involved, will I never get to see my parent again? Sometimes it can be really hard on kids having to split households. I know it might seem fun in the beginning, but after a while, going back,
Yeah.
imagine yourself as an adult. Every week you have to pack up your clothes and go to another house. That's hard, and it can be a lot for kids. And I think sometimes,
Yeah.
again, that's not something that we're always cognizant of, because you think, oh, you get two houses, you get two beds. You don't want 2 houses and 2 beds that you have to go to every other week.
That's right.
Maybe once a month for or maybe once a summer for vacation, but that's not the same as packing up your stuff and taking it and going and meeting
Yeah.
at the store to get to meet daddy, and so all those things can be really hard. So again, just have empathy and understanding for where people are in your life and tell them that it is okay, but if you need to set boundaries around what they're exposed to because it is more hurtful or painful, please do that.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of children splitting households, we know now that there are more fathers and mothers, and traditionally speaking, children do tend to go with the mother, especially the younger ones. But fathers have stepped up more than ever that we've seen in the last 30 years. So we know that sometimes they'll go to dad's house or mom house, or if it's 50-50 custody or mom has more time with them. But I want to talk about something that's real that a lot of parents deal with. They go to mom or dad's house for the weekend and they come back with you and say you're remarried or you are now living with a new partner, or your partner's just over there. The kid is coming back with a different attitude or mood than you dropped them off with. And you're wondering, okay, that's their household. That's what they're doing. I can't really control that. But talk about the influence of behavior, maybe from bouncing from environment to environment, how that can affect even the relationship is moving on with someone new. Because ideally, I know you would say this as a therapist, children do need healthy relationships with both parents if it's possible. But that doesn't always happen necessarily. And that doesn't mean, you know this, you can have the discipline, but that doesn't mean your former mate has the same discipline and rules in the household. And so the children can come back with, perhaps, I hate to say this, especially about teenagers, but with attitude, some moodiness is going on. Real talk for real people, Miss Jones.
Yeah, again, it's going to go back to that. Sometimes we just say, oh, they'll get over it or they'll work through it. And so the kid comes in, you might notice they have an attitude and they go off into their room and they're on a computer device.
Yeah,
Those are the
yeah,
moments when you really want to sit down and have a conversation with your child. And again, just checking with them. Tell me what you're feeling. Not, I know the very common thing that we ask is, how are you feeling? Most people are going to say fine. We
yeah,
want people to really connect to their emotions. It's, what are you feeling, right? You just came back. And not only that, right, it's okay to be exposed to different types of environments, but you want to continue to reinforce what boundaries you have for your household, right? So I
yeah.
get that you just came from your dad's house and this is okay there. I just want to remind you the rules here, and you don't have to like them, and you can be angry because, again, I think we want people to not have these emotions and be happy. Um, and you can be angry and you can still do what is required of you. But again, just make that space. Don't avoid having these tough conversations with your kids. Don't avoid having these tough conversations with yourself
That's
and
right.
really what you are feeling in all of this change that you are exposing yourself to or going
Yeah.
through.
I love that. I love that. You've got to be realistic with yourself and obviously your children. But what a great point you brought out. A great life hack. Instead of saying, how do you feel, right? How was your day? It was good. Because that's what we're programmed to say. What are you feeling right now? And that way we can go through the emotions inside out. Famous movie going on right now, but talking about your emotions. I'm angry. I'm disappointed. I'm depressed. I'm hurt. I'm agitated. Things that we really want to get that conversation going, because when it comes to our children, this, Miss Jones, our most precious assets, we've got to address the mental and the emotional now as soon as possible. And obviously it's work in process, in progress rather, but we've got to make sure they're okay, because when it's all said and done, they're the legacy and what's left behind. And the real legacy, because so many times people talk about money and land and property. Forget all that. It's the emotional stability, I believe, that we leave them in. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And even for yourselves, right? So going into a new relationship, if you haven't completely emotionally let go of the old relationship, therapy can be valuable in that. Sometimes, again, people bring in that baggage where you're comparing that other person to your previous relationship, and that can also be hard on blended families,
Yes.
new
That's right.
relationships as well. So definitely, again, just thinking about what you're going through in this new change, and
Yeah.
sometimes this is so too good to be true, and the next thing you know, you're sabotaging because this is the greatest love of your life, but you're not necessarily used to it. So be
Right.
mindful of that as well.
And that's such a great point. I've heard experts like yourself say sometimes people have been so used to toxicity, so used to being miserable. And let's say this, you can be in an unhappy relationship and it wasn't necessarily toxic. Because I know we love using now, they're toxic, they're narcissists. Not every relationship that's unhappy, you're with a narcissist, right? Now let's get off the Hollywood drama for a minute.
No,
You could just be
that's the
unhappy.
pop culture word. Gaslighting and
I said,
narcissism.
I said, I didn't know that 99% of men were narcissists until now.
Yeah, right. It's
We're having a little fun, everybody. But back to the seriousness. We've got a question with Sunshine out of Atlanta. She says a question: blended families can be easy if both parents let go of their issues and allow themselves to be the best parent regardless. I love that, Sunshine. What she's focusing on, what she's saying is make it about the kids. Because that's really what it should be about, right? Because if the marriage or the relationship is over, Miss Jones, you're a therapist, that we really should be focused on the children. But real talk for real people, Sunshine, thank you for that question or comment. But a lot of times, I'm not so convinced the person wants the person back. But it's like whatever issues that got us broken up, I'm still angry about it. And they often lash out and take it out through the kids. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that can occur as well. But I also, again, think that expectations of ourselves and of other people can cause stress. So it's like you have a house, a hurricane comes and tears your house down completely. It doesn't mean that you're not going to yearn for that house, right? That you know it's over. You know you can't have that house again. You
Yeah.
can build it up, build a new house on the lot, but that house is gone. And so even in that, people might say, move on and just build you a new house. You got the money, you'll be good. It's not going to take away from the fact that one, some people feel like a failure if their relationships have ended. They might be,
Good point.
again, having some shame around whatever. And so you guys are gonna always hear me say, just take the time to understand what you are feeling, connect to that. And if you do believe that the relationship between you and this other person needs some healing so you can co-parent, it's okay to go to therapy, get a mediator, get a coach, do something so that you guys work through that so that you can be the best parents that you possibly can be.
I love that. Real talk for real people. We're talking about blended families here on Let's Talk America with host Shana Thornton podcast. I'm Shana. Tenelle Jones is on with us. And I want to add this, and I think this is something important from any split, breakup, divorce as well, that you also have to understand as you co-parent, if they're 14 or you're still just showing up because your daughter just had a baby and she's 30 years old, that you as much as you want to co-parent, as much as you want to get along, things are not always going to be perfect, and you've got to be okay with that too. Which means, and tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, Miss Jones, but if you walk into the room and she doesn't speak to you, you've got to be okay with that too. You can't make a big deal, oh, this is all falling apart, because people are going to do what they want to do.
Yeah. I think a very interesting phenomenon is that if you say you value certain things, then value them. No one should be able to take that value away from you. So if
That's
you
right.
naturally speak to people that you see and you go into space and somebody doesn't speak back to you, then you're not valuing what you say you value. You're
Right.
focused on whether or not another person is going to behave in a way
That's
that you
right.
want them to behave. And that is an expectation that will
That's
cause
right.
you much stress.
That's right. And such a great point that you're allowing, and I know it's easier said than done, right? But you're allowing one person to determine your happiness in that moment. And when you put it the way you just said it, that's not logical, right? If they didn't speak back, they just didn't speak back. It won't be the first time. If you think it is, go to Manhattan and get on the subway. They don't speak either. So it's okay. Shout out to New York. I love New York, but they don't speak. Let's keep going with the questions. You're watching Real Talk, everybody. I'm Shana on with Tenelle Jones. Of course, she is an acclaimed family therapist. Brandy, she's a medical provider out of Atlanta. She said, blended families take prayer and understanding on both sides. Boundaries are necessary and the ability to converse. That is such a powerful point, because I think so many times we do the check-ins. How's everybody doing? But you said this yourself. There've got to be boundaries. If that's an adult child or if that child is 8 years old, there are things that just have to be boundaries, and understanding that mom or dad have the right to move on, right? It didn't work out. And I believe this. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, but those boundaries have to be set, right? Mom is going to choose the best that makes her happy. Dad is going to choose who makes him happy. And of course, that child is always going to be in that life. And we're going to do our best to make sure you're healthy and stable. That's the most important part. But I'll say this about boundaries that mentioned about, of course, by Brandy again. When we teach children our boundaries, if they're 21 or if they're 45, you know what I happen to think comes from it? That 20 years from now, they also will understand that they have the right to have boundaries, right? Because I think we don't want to necessarily, I say this as a proud parent, to teach them that whatever goes, there are boundaries that people have to have, and those boundaries exist if it's your mother, father, or child, right or wrong.
Yeah, but I would also add, make sure that you're consistent with them, right? You can't set a boundary today and let it go tomorrow and then want to put it back, right? Especially for younger kids, that can be a lot more challenging for them. And so if you're setting boundaries, communicate them. Because again, most people set boundaries and they think that people automatically know what they are because they should read your mind. No, let
Right.
people know, like, this is the boundary that I'm set. And sometimes it might be helpful, especially if it's a close family member like your mom,
Yeah. Yeah.
that misses that old relationship. Help them understand why the boundary is beneficial for not only you, but for them as well. Because sometimes
Yeah.
people can't always see the forest for the trees.
That's so true. And when you say communicate, that's what Brandy out of Atlanta touched on, converse, the ability to converse as much as possible. And I'll add this, also trying to remain as patient and rational as possible. Because you know this, even if the breakup was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it doesn't mean people can't get emotional about it, right? If the child says, well, I don't want to be here, I want to go because you moved on with her, that we have to try to remain as rational as possible, understanding that the grief for people can last sometimes 20 years later, but try to be as
Mhm.
patient and extend grace as much as possible, that they too can come along in a healthy manner that we've come along in.
Correct. Yes. Hmm.
Stacy out of Atlanta. Thank you, Stacy. Atlanta is on tonight. She says sometimes it's harder with older children. That's a great point. We're talking about younger children adjusting. I happen to believe sometimes the younger children can be a little more resilient. Not saying they don't have bumps in the road, but can be resilient long term. But she's saying the older ones. And let me ask you this: is that likely because they like you and I, right? We're young people, but we're Generation Xers, that like us, we may be settled in our ways and we have gotten used to perhaps our own mother or the stepmom that was in our life for 25 years. And then all of a sudden, dad is saying, well, that's over now. I have someone else I want to introduce you to. She laughs different from my stepmom that I'm so familiar with. She cooks different. So maybe I'm so settled that I don't want to adjust to something new. Could that also be a part of the issue with an older child that's past 21 years old?
It could be, and kind of like what I said earlier, it could also be just them, if they're in a relationship that they believe in, like, okay, so then if my parent can't keep a healthy relationship, then what does that mean for the relationship I'm in? Or will I ever find somebody? Or can I ever, especially if it's like around infidelity, does everybody cheat? So people start to then kind of formulate their own core beliefs sometimes by what they see their parents going through and their own
Good
experiences.
point.
And I think they're going to do that no matter what
Yeah,
age. And so just just be mindful of that, right? And it's,
yeah,
again, ask them, like, what are you afraid of, or what are you concerned about, and see if they're able to share that with you. But I think it could be more of like, gosh, what does this mean for myself if
that's a
my
good
if
point.
my parents were married for 40 years and then now they're
That's a
not.
very good point because the reality is no longer there. I would imagine that goes into it. But I also think I'll say this as someone was married at one point, that when age appropriate, it may also, when people, make, like you said, well, will that happen to me? Will that not? There's no crystal ball for any of us. But understanding that you can have an opinion when you're 17 years old or when you're even 25 years old. But until you go through life, until you get into a serious long-term partnership, you don't necessarily know how things can go because life happens. And I don't say that to water things down, but I do say that to say at 17, you may not have an understanding of what goes on between two people that once loved each other and grew apart. You may not understand the dynamics between a marriage or a partnership because you just don't have the experience. And good things and bad things happen to all of us as well.
And not only that, like, every relationship is different. And so
That's
that's
right.
the space that we all automatically assume that everybody's going to experience things the way we experience. And that's really not, then you're not being empathic in the spaces of life. Nobody is you. And so,
That's
if,
right.
Shane, if you and I, had the same exact life, we're still doing it different because we're different
That's
people.
right.
And so I think it could be valuable or helpful to tell your adult kids that, like, you
Th-
get their fear. It doesn't mean that they're going to go through what you went
No.
through.
No. And I always think lessons can there be great learning points from it. What can we learn from this? Right? Even in a split, what can we learn? That at all costs, and this is everyone has different lessons that are learned from it, but at all costs also protect who you are and be able to be okay with you. And regardless of what happened, if you leave or if she left you, you're gonna be okay. And because you and I both know this, Miss Jones, no matter how much we plan for a pretty picnic, in the words of Outkast out of Atlanta, you can't predict the weather. And that is so true. There's nothing you can do. And I don't say this to be doom or gloom. I'm just being realistic because millions of people have been divorced around the world, if not a billion. Then at the end of the day, you can do everything. That doesn't stop someone from waking up one day and leaving you. And you cannot fall apart. And if you do, I'm sure our therapist, Miss Jones, will say, but you got to put yourself back together pretty soon if you do fall apart, especially when you have children, so you can be resilient and push forward. And I'll say this, it may not be the life you envisioned, but it can still be one amazing, dynamic life, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hope. It's
That's
okay to
right.
have.
Hope. I love that. Hope. Well, we're going to keep moving. Cassandra out of Atlanta says, great question. How do you deal with a co parenting situation of school age children when the non primary care parent's partner is dismissive to the children, causing the children not wanting to go with the non primary parent for scheduled visits? I think that's probably something that happens more than we're willing to admit. That's an interesting question. I'm going to let the therapist, Cassandra out of Atlanta, take that one on.
Yeah, again, I don't know the situation. If you feel comfortable having a conversation with the other kids' parents, if everybody can get in a space. And I think it's all about how you approach the situation, right? I know sometimes anger breeds anger, but really just, again, help everybody recognize that if this kid is avoiding coming over there or then starts to get into a very dark space, how that's going to impact everybody
That's
anyway,
right.
right? So no matter what, if you don't want it, you're going to have it. So really encouraging
Good
everybody
point.
to come to the table and talk about what's going on, and see if there can be resolution. And then if not, again, if the kid doesn't feel safe in that space, then you might have to think about what are your other options and
Yeah.
talk to legal support in that.
I love that. And I also want to point out that I think certain generations, right, Xers on up, the reality is, well, they're not harming them. And they're tend to think, and you know this as a family therapist, they're thinking physical, right? There's no physical abuse going on. There's no sexual abuse going on. But I'm sure as a therapist, you will also say, but the child has to be in a mental safe space too, right? And I'm not talking about the moodiness of a teenager or preteen, dad made me get off my PlayStation. I'm not talking about that, right? But we are talking about, perhaps if we're talking about dismissive co-parent of the partner of that non-primary parent, that is that child feeling neglected? Are they feeling unsafe mentally? Because you and I both know that mental neglect or negligence of any sort, or any sort of, and I'm not trying to exaggerate the situation from that question, but if it's some sort of mind game as well, passive aggressive type that this dad or mom's girlfriend or boyfriend is doing, that can be just as damaging as physical abuse, correct?
Yeah, and you want to find ways that the kid can feel in, like, kind of power and control in those spaces. So, like, for example, if it's a court order and this is the way it is, they get shared custody, they have to go over there, then make sure your kid has a therapist so they can learn how to manage any anxiety that they might feel over there,
Yeah.
going to their dad's house and the stepmom is dismissive. Teach them, again, different ways to feel safe in the space that they are in, because I think that's true sometimes when people have specific jobs that they're working in and they don't always like the work, or they don't like the people, but they don't
Yeah.
want to leave the job because, there's an attachment to something. And so I would just encourage you to have those kids maybe talk to a therapist or just anybody about how, somebody that they trust, about how to be in those spaces, knowing that nothing probably won't change until they are 18 or 16 and
Yeah,
they
that's
into.
fair. Especially if the non-primary parent, or even if it's your primary parent, right? Because sometimes they can be with a partner, their own behavior can be dismissive. But also recognizing that you can tell them, right? Because you said ideally you want to talk to that parent, but that doesn't mean that anything's going to change.
No.
It just doesn't. You can talk them blue in the face and they don't see the issue, or they can become defensive of their new partner. You're just saying this, or you poison her head to think that they don't like them, and they're not really open to seeing their child as an individual.
Yeah. And that's when, sometimes a therapist can be helpful in helping the kid find their own words to communicate to their parent, like what they're experiencing while they're in the home.
Yeah,
If there's that, you're just poisoning them against me kind of,
yeah.
conversation or dynamic.
Yeah, I love that. We have another comment from Sunshine out of Atlanta. She says, I was married for 20 years, but separated 5 of those years. Believe it or not, my ex husband and I never changed our parental obligations, even with him living out of state. I included him and kept him involved in our kids' lives, meaning everything. He never missed a beat, but it took both of us to remain active in spite of us going through our separate ways with our kids. All four deserve to grow up happy with both parents present. I love that. When I want to give kudos to Sunshine out of Atlanta, because when I hear that, Miss Jones, you're a therapist, but let me know if you agree or disagree. I see maturity. I see someone grounded, and I see someone focused on the real issue, the children.
Yeah. Sounds like there was a lot of mutual respect. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, which can happen even if you don't work out with the partner, the husband, the wife, the whoever. It doesn't mean that you can't move on and have a very coherent life with afterwards as well, especially when children are involved. Vicky says, I thought it was easy to with blended families, but it's not always easy. Certainly, and I know you. I see you shaking your head, Miss Jones. It's not always easy for those who have perfect, ideal utopia stories. Yeah, right. And I say that only because, and I say that in all fairness, because even natural biological families, we know there are bumps in the road. You can have your biological mother and father together for 40 years, and there's still been bumps in the road where kids did not always agree with the rules in the house. And so when you add additional people in, it's always going to be bumps in the road. No life is perfect, but we can make it worthwhile. Stacy out of Atlanta says, I still keep in touch with my ex's daughter. She just turned 21 and graduated from the Air Force boot camp. I met with her when she was 5. I love that. That's something we didn't touch on. That when you do meet people in different stages of their life, maybe it was a serious girlfriend or boyfriend, or you actually got married, that a lot of times they have children, you break up, you go your separate ways. But there are those people who still keep in contact with the children. That's pretty nice, huh?
Yeah. I think that's a great thing that can happen. I definitely encourage that. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's possible, right? It all depends on the parents involved in the maturity of it and the age of the children.
Yes.
Yeah, because if they're older, obviously they can have their own relationship and rapport with you. Brent says grief comes with loss of any kind, and that's a great point, because we talked about not just with the death of someone, that's where our minds go, but also the breakup, or even, I know we're not talking about this, but the separation of a job, any of that, or moving from the house you and the old partner lived in. A lot of people say, well, it's just a condo, it's just an apartment, get over it, but it was familiar for you, and especially perhaps for the children.
Yeah. Or just kids growing up and moving out the home, that's going to produce some grief. Because now, if that's been your focus in your relationship, now you have to figure out, how do we function together without the kids?
Yeah. That's a great point. Stacy did want to follow up and piggyback when she says she has a relationship with a 21-year-old young lady. She said they weren't married. Her and the guy were not married. They were just in a relationship, and her biological mother was not in the picture. So, okay, so let's just be real. That also probably allowed the dynamics for the relationship to continue sometimes as well. Sometimes. I don't want to always assume. We have another comment out of Sunshine out of Atlanta. The best advice I can give is for both parents to have to come to an agreement that the children is what's most important. Mom and dad can either decide to work together to make sure they have a great healthy habits for the children, or tug of war, creating chaos. The choice is up to the parents. The C word of chaos is real because when there is the drama, when the toxicity from the bad relationship continues with the children, Miss Jones, I think Sunshine out of Atlanta is right. It's just chaotic and it's drama. And I cannot imagine, first off, that's draining for us adults, but the burden that children carry, especially when they're trying to go to school and avoid bullying and everything that comes with growing up in the world we live in, that's got to be hard, huh?
Yeah, I think it's because we are in a culture and a society, even now in our political space, where one side must win, right? And so when people, if the people are in those dynamics, it's not about how do we all win, it's I must win because I must be right. And so that's where you can see some of those challenges or difficulties when people break up and the kids aren't the priority because the couples are there's so much hurt and pain there for whatever reason, whatever the cause of it in the relationship is. And so people believe that the opposite of love is hate, and it is not,
Yes.
because there's still a lot of energy that you're pouring into this
Oh,
person that's taking up your time,
come
your
on.
soul, your mind, your body. And what we do know is that the body is taking in all of that.
Woo,
So the more you try to hate on that person and try to make their life make your
woo.
life miserable, you're also doing the same to yourself because you aren't able to let go and move on. And so the opposite of love is not hate. So if you hate that person, it's still a very passion filled emotion that is
That's right.
consuming you from the inside out.
You make a valid point. You're still spending energy on it. And when you're free, you don't even do that. You address what affects your children, you keep it trucking.
You don't have
Deontay
to.
out of Atlanta Metro says, great question. How early in the relationship should you discuss parental values? That's a great point. When you've met someone new, you're saying that I love, I'm really digging him, I'm digging her, I'm digging, we're making this great relationship work. But the parental values say they both have children, which is realistic. A lot of people do have children. The parental values part, how soon should that come up?
Day one.
Yeah.
I think any conversation around your values and who you are and what's meaningful, what matters should be day one, because then you don't might not need a date number two, right? Some of those things
Valid point.
people like, especially if you're dating with a purpose. Now, if you're
Yeah.
dating for fun, that might be different. But if you're dating with the intention of connecting and building something with
Yeah.
somebody, it is never too early to talk about your values and what what you want for yourself. If you are a parent, talk about what your expectations are. What would this look like? Again, I know people might say this too soon. Is it?
Well, and you made a valid point. If you're dating with intention, it would be day one because perhaps I mean, as much as you're saying he's fun, she's fun, whoever is fun, you make a point. At the end of the day, though, why go to date two or three if you're not on the same page? And those are things you're not willing to compromise.
Right. It's like when you go get a new car and then you maybe later read the manual and you're like, I didn't know my car could do this. So you want to understand everything that you possibly can about this person before
Yeah, that's
you.
a good point. Instead of 2 years in, you realize, wait, what? And you
Yeah.
have such different opinions on it. Parenting as well as too. And I do want to say this, and you said this, children do grow up and move on as well. So I do think obviously you have to think your intention and where you are in life, and if what does that really mean as well when you talk about blending families, of how soon that can be, and will this child eventually be out of your home as well? Because let's be real, and you touched on this at the top of the segment, Miss Jones, they will grow up and get a life of their own as well,
Mhm. Yeah.
and just keep it.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that's
Hopefully,
right. Valid point. Hopefully they will. That's the goal here. We
Yeah.
have another question. Sunshine says, true, but question is, are the parents exhibiting morally correct behavior for children that are young or older, tend to feed off what the other parent is doing or what they're seeing and taught? That's a great question. When you have the 31-year-old that's reluctant to accept dad's new woman, be it his girlfriend or friend or wife, you do wonder sometimes, is some of those negative words coming from the biological mother? Good point.
Could be, or could be coming from social media, or could be coming from
That's
whatever
true.
TV shows that they're watching. Again, kids are, they have certain wants and needs too. They have feelings.
Yeah.
It's amazing that we want, and I know Shannon, you keep saying that kids are resilient. I sometimes I tend to disagree with that. It's amazing that we want kids to be able to do things that we're not willing to do, and that is manage their anger. Well, as an adult, if you don't know how to manage your anger and you're the parent, please help me understand the reasons you would want your kids to be able to do that, right? So
Real.
to have logic to
Now
be
that's
logical.
real talk.
No, their brains aren't
That's
even
real.
fully developed yet. So um they don't have to be the resilient ones. You do as the adult, and to
That's
guide
right.
them and lead them through that journey. And sometimes we might think
That's
that they
right.
can do it on their own, and they cannot, because then they grow up to be adults seeking therapists because they had a messed up
Big,
childhood.
yeah.
They were
And
not
yeah, and you
as
and thank
resilient as we thought they were.
thank you for correcting that, because, and again, you're the therapist. I'm not, right? I'm a podcaster, journalist. I know what I know, but you make a valid point, and you just kept it real. We're expecting them to do what we can't do, right? Right? Because let's be real, the parents are cussing when the co-parenting situation doesn't work out. They're getting upset. They're yelling. They're allowing half of their day to be messed up. But we're going to turn around and say, "Now you're 17. Bottle your emotions and move forward, trooper." You have a very very valid point. We're expecting them to do what 40 years or 55 years of what we couldn't do. And you are absolutely right. This goes back to my thinking of, let's have grace and patience with our children and with ourselves as we work through these things. Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate you. Vicky says a good one. She says, I've been married for over a decade to my loving husband. Husband's grown son said he will not accept our marriage because he doesn't like the concept of a blended family. Help us out, Miss Jones. You're a therapist. I know you've heard it all, but your thoughts on that quickly?
Well, how old did she say the son was?
I don't know, but I want to assume this person is over 25 years old.
So again, people don't have to accept it, right? I think we want people to buy into everything that we're doing because we want their approval. That's still, to me, is not going to cause you peace. You're not going to have the approval of everybody. You have to, at some point, if you want peace, joy, I don't even like the word happiness, right? If you want peace, joy, satisfaction, you don't need everybody's approval. You
That's
just
a good
need
point.
yours. And if you believe in God or higher power,
That's a good point.
then I say focus on
Good
that,
point.
right? Sometimes we
That's right.
want people to value us, um, and maybe we don't value ourselves, or we don't appreciate ourselves, or we don't, all the things that we want people to give us. Can you give that to yourself? People don't have to accept everything that you're
Good
doing. That
point.
is okay. It is okay.
That's right. Even our children and loved ones, right? I mean, that's real, because you're like you're saying we don't need validation from everybody, and that sometimes includes our children. I would imagine, for, and thank you so much, Miss Vicky, for pointing that out. I would imagine that what becomes at odds for so many people, you love your new mate, you want them to feel comfortable. In an ideal world, of course, you want your children to like the person you're loving, your soulmate, but sometimes they don't, and I think people can be at odds because they're feeling, perhaps, I'm just saying, speaking hypothetical, that the kid doesn't want to come around, or they're not as comfortable, and that other parent could feel like they're choosing. But you make a very valid point. Everybody's not going to be happy, and everybody doesn't want the same happy traits for all of us. And some people, some children, some mothers, some fathers, some cousins, some brothers and sisters will want you back in something unhappy instead of you being happy. And my father has a saying, you're darned if you do and you're darned if you don't. So you might as well do what's best for you.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to keep moving along. Stacey says, yes, it's true. For instance, fighting disrespectful talk in front of the kids should be avoided as much as possible. We agree, in a perfect world it happens, but in the real world, you've got some people, Miss Jones, who just, they're going to say their peace of mind and they're going to do what they want to do, and that can impact children.
Yeah. Again, I think if you are the parent or the main parent, or you hear some of these things going on, you just have to be able to talk to your kids about what's happening, especially depending on their age, and they can understand, because most of them probably already know, based off of, if you ever watch a TV show that a kid might watch, they have a lot of different things that
Yes,
they're exposed to anyway.
they
So
do.
just talk to them about, like, again, what their thoughts are, what their feelings are, and letting them know the things that they can control and things that they cannot control. Just constantly having those conversations. You're not going to be able to stop another parent from doing
That's right.
a lot of what you may not want them to do, but you can continue to guide and parent your child through that difficulty.
That's right. I love that. Brandy out of Atlanta says everyone grieves during a divorce. I love it. She's right. Not just the people going through it, but the children, even the neighbors. Maybe they liked the couple together and they weren't. That's so, so true. Denisha out of Atlanta Metro says, what if the child is happy with your new partner after divorce, but uncomfortable with seeing you kissing and hugging? The real talk for real people, Miss Jones, is Let's Talk America Radio, right? That's a good point because, kids can be kind of anyway, because, of course, after 40, you're not supposed to have a life, right?
Yeah,
Help
I
us
think
out with
that,
that
yeah, that
question.
can be something that's common. Yeah.
Help us out with that of children liking the person but being uncomfortable seeing mom and dad, or in an intimate situation where, and even healthy intimacy. We're not talking about anything inappropriate. We're talking
Yeah.
about just hugging and kissing.
Yeah, I think again, just kind of checking on what is that about? What makes you uncomfortable about seeing me kiss? And just talk about the healthiness of it,
Yeah,
right? And how it's okay
yeah,
to, when they one day meet their partner,
that's right.
they might want to do the same thing as well.
That's right. I love that because we're showing them as much as possible what's normal and what can be healthy, right?
Correct.
And
Yes.
moving on, I know you'll agree with this, is healthy, right?
Yes. Moving on.
Because we don't want to stay stuck. We don't want to 20 years later, and we'll touch on that before we begin to wrap up. But we don't want to stay stuck as much as possible. I know you would say grieve, work through it, but we certainly want to get to the point where we can be bold enough to love again, right?
Yeah, of course. That's what we're
Yeah.
here for. Love and connection and engagement. We're not here to be alone.
Yes,
Make sure
powerful.
if you're in a relationship and you feel alone, then that's probably not the healthiest relationship for you.
That's right. Powerful. Banasha out of Atlanta says, yes, change is one of the most difficult dynamics to work through. But as you've stated, it can be worked through, though.
Yes.
Another
Yes.
comment from Sunshine. Not everyone, a divorce can sometimes bring peace. It did for us. Today, our kids are all grown, happy, and successful. And if I could have stayed married, it would not have been possible. It would have been the opposite. That's something we got to be real about. I think a lot of times we talk about the jinx of divorces and breakups, and the toughness it goes through. But there are millions of people, Miss Jones, who say they were much better off not being with that person.
Yes. Again, just because you leave doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It could be a very healthy decision for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Mm.
Very good. We've got a question here. Actually, my own birth children blended perfectly with their dad's new wife and my current boyfriend. This topic hits home because my current boyfriend, only son, started off interacting with me, but as he got older, his mother planted a negative seed that has created a wedge between him and I. Now he's 24 and things were perfect previously. Do I let it go, ignore it since he's all grown up now? That's a tough one.
Well, if you feel like there's benefit in resolving it, then I would say, definitely reach across the aisle and have a conversation. I think we're in a space where there's a lot of misinformation about maybe about yourself, about just a lot of different things in the world. So if you value this person, if you value them in your life or the space that they hold within your life, then I think it could be worth having a conversation with them.
So true. Vicky out of Atlanta says, should the focus be about the kids if they're grown? Good. That's a good one.
I think it depends. It varies depending on the impact the kids have. If the kids live in the home with you and you
Okay.
get meet somebody new or you get remarried. Um, so if there are grandkids involved and they might, threaten to keep the grandkids. I think they don't have to be, and that could be a space where you would set those boundaries. But just understand that they might be impacted as well if if they feel like they have a reason to be concerned about your well-being.
Nice. Great answer. Latrina says, that's so good when you reference value what is true to you. And I think that's also a great piggyback from the question that was just asked. When you're saying, should you focus on what value matters to you now, especially when we're not talking about necessarily the needs of a 5-year-old, but we're talking about the needs of a 35-year-old. Right. That's a good point. Brandy says boundaries are very healthy to have. Yolanda out of Atlanta says boundaries are necessary in all relationships. That's a good one. Banasha says perspectives change with lived experiences. That goes back to the kid that's saying, hey, why'd you do this to mom? Why'd you do this to dad? Why'd you leave her? Why'd you file for divorce? But like I said, the lenses of a 17-year-old is not necessarily the lenses of someone that's 49 years old. When they have a little more experience and understand the dynamics of things are not as simple as they appear. Right, Miss Jones, do you agree on that? That as we get older, sometimes the ideals that we have of romance is not always what we keep with us.
Well, I don't know if that comes with age, but definitely people willing to grow and
You're right. I shouldn't assume that comes with age.
yeah, with age, but definitely some, some growth.
Thank
Mhm.
you. We have Andre out of Pageland, South Carolina. Thank you for joining us, South Carolina. He's saying, I think all parties can agree to disagree, but still do what's best for the interest of the child. How do you like that?
Yeah, I think if everybody, like I said, is if that's the compromise, and that's the compromise. We don't always have to be on the same page. Nobody has to win, but what is best for us and what's best for the kids.
Yeah, it's so true. Oh, and Miss Vicky referenced that the stepson is 31 years old.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you,
31.
Vicky.
Thank you so much. But now she says we have to build resilience through providing a safe place, security, and lead by example through the difficult changes. I know she's a social worker out of Atlanta. Your thoughts on that, Miss Jones?
Yeah, and when we say safe, there's this concept that we talk about in the workplace called psychological safety.
Yeah.
And so I think that could be a phenomenon that's true for your home life and your personal relationships as well. So making sure that no matter what, especially with young kids, the more you can let them know what's happening and what the changes are, then that will help them feel better prepared to face those changes. I think instead of just kind of saying, this is what we're doing, give them that space to transition, let them know how long something is going to take, especially for smaller kids. And yeah, so just thank you for just continuing to, you can never really over communicate when it comes to some of the things that might be happening as you're changing relationships.
Yeah, so true. Jeanette, thank you for the feedback out of Fayetteville, Georgia, Atlanta metro suburb, saying great program. This was needed. We appreciate everyone for all the comments and questions. What a busy night. Blended
Right?
families, as we can see, Miss Jones, it's a hot topic with
Right?
so many people moving on with their lives. It's rightfully so that this would be a very hot topic to discuss. And I'm so glad that you all tuned in tonight. Before we get out of here, I want to address something that's real that does go into the blended family concept that I've had several associates and friends address with me over the last few weeks. And it's simply the question of knowing when to move forward, right? There are many people that have come out of divorces or splits from COVID. They're trying to readjust to a dating world that looks different. Say you were married for 20 years. If you wake up to this dating world, you may be like, what is this? What's going on? And people may have some anxiousness and anxiety and saying, when do I really go and get a new friend? When do I move on and know if I'm ready for romance? And I know there's no crystal ball, it doesn't exist. But help us out in general terms, Miss Jones, as an acclaimed therapist. You work with so many different patients with different concerns and issues. There are people that say it's been 7 years, but I'm still anxious, so I must not be ready. I want to talk about this as someone who's gone on air before, and you have with me as well, and you've done other programs. But the anxiousness is not always something bad, right? I mean, is some of that to be expected for some people as they move on in life?
Yeah, anxiety is, it can be very helpful. What you can do when you're feeling anxious is to say, what is the worst thing that my mind is telling me that could happen? What's the opposite of that? And then what are all the possibilities in between? And then out of all of that, what do I really care about most? And how do I now look for that person that's going to be the best person for me?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And like you're saying, use it for good. Where is it coming out of? And understand, and this is Shana saying this, I'm no therapist, but if you've been used to something for a decade, you've been used to something for a decade. And when you're stepping out on something through faith or through adventure, it's always going to be the unexpected that comes with it. But I've heard you say this on our previous shows, our latest show we had on dating and finding love, that it can be something magnificent again.
It can.
Yeah, yeah. Which it's all about human connection. Before you get out of here, Tenelle Jones, we've got to get you to tell us where they can find more information out about you. But before you leave us, thank you, Sunshine, for saying whoop whoop. Great advice you gave us. We love the whoop whoop. We always love those. where you're watching Real Talk with real people here with Let's Talk America. I'm Shana Thornton, on air host and your executive producer. Tenelle Jones took it away, knocked it out of the ballpark, where she talked about blended families and what's healthy and what works. She's worked with hundreds and hundreds of patients with this topic and others, and how it affects children and other individuals in the family. But before you leave us, I want you to give us two takeaways, two quick takeaways for those individuals dealing with blended families, which is most of us at this point in our life in some shape or form. If it's our brother, if it's our own life, some shape or form. The two best things to keep in mind when the bumps come up, when the attitudes come up, when the "you're not my mom" comes up, or "I don't like her" comes up, or "I don't want to go with your kids, I don't want to hang out with your kids." Help us for people to remain positive and not throw everything out with the bathwater because, hey, the kid had an attitude with me, the relationship is over. Help us out.
Yeah, so we're talking about blended family. So you have to make sure that you have the right ingredients, and that starts with yourself, right? So as you are starting to blend yourself with another person, another family, do you have the values? Can you communicate the values to those people that you're also connecting with, and then discuss what is the blend? What do you want it to look like? Sometimes we're just going into spaces without really having that vision. So have that vision for yourself, communicate that vision, share that vision with everybody involved, and see if you can have open, honest communications. And then second part, make sure you make space for all emotions, and you don't need acceptance from everyone to be great.
You don't need acceptance for everyone to be great. That's for blended families, and that's for the world. Be the
Yes.
greatest version of yourself. Thank you. Let's give, if you're with us, we're going to give a digital clap to Tenelle Jones, one
Oh,
and
thank
only
you.
family therapist. She's worked with so many families, marriages, people, relationships, people trying to be the best version of themselves through human connection. So key. Yolanda, we appreciate you. She said, great show and great advice. We love it. Tenelle Jones, you're a friend of this show. You've been rocking with us for years. We've talked about everything under the sun, and we're going to continue to address the emotional and mental needs of everyone out there. So we do certainly want that to be known, and especially our minority community, to let them know that therapy is available. Help is on the way. Healing is possible. Thank you, Latrina and Denisha, for the digital hand clap. They gave you that digital hand clap I mentioned.
Oh, thank you.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Dee. She said great advice as well. So thank you for always rocking with us, helping Let's Talk America reach individuals. Tell us how they can get in contact with you, and please make a pitch for if they're in San Diego, if they're sitting in Stockbridge, Georgia, or if they're in Miami, Florida, how therapy can really be beneficial. It may not be for everybody, but it can be helpful for individuals. And also, if you're of faith, because I've heard you say this before, faith and therapy are not enemies. Help us out.
No, yeah, there's spiritual based counseling, there's life coaching. If you're not really ready to say you're going to therapy, but therapy can be very valuable in all spaces, no matter where you are in your life. Even if you feel like you're doing well, it's kind of like you go to the doctor to get that annual checkup. Go get an annual checkup from a therapist. It can be one of the best things. It can probably also save your life in a different way, your emotional life. So yeah, we're great. Don't be afraid.
And you also, in therapists, I want to say this before you give your contact info, just like, and I don't want to water this down, but just like the hairstylist or the physician, it may not be a good fit. It's okay, right, to go and try to get a therapist you're comfortable with, right?
Oh yeah, interview us. If it doesn't work out, then change. And I tell
Yeah.
people that all the time. I want to make sure you're comfortable. We about to go on this journey. I'm about to guide you through your life. So you want to like me.
And there are therapists like yourself who focus more on family counseling. There's some that deal with obviously grief. There's some that deal with trauma, sexual abuse. Right? There are ones who certainly have specialties, like a physician with endocrinology and cardiology. Right?
Yes, that is true. Yeah.
So definitely. So whatever issues you think you may be going through, maybe it's some childhood trauma, whatever it is, make sure you're looking with someone who has experience in counseling that individual as well. Tenelle Jones, help us out. A website or phone number, how they can contact you, because you were such a hit on the show. But Nasha gave you a digital thumbs up and a clap.
Yeah, you can reach me at Tenelle O. Jones, LLC at Outlook.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can reach me there. Or if you want to text me to set up something or just have a chat, 843-364-7798.
And say that again and tell them about your virtual options too, that you don't always have to be in the office.
No, you can definitely reach out. We can schedule something virtually if that works. In any way, phone, text, whatever works best for you, then we can make that happen.
And that
Yes.
phone number again.
843-364-7798.
The one and only Tenelle Jones. She's a friend of this show. She is a certified family therapist, relationships, working with children, transitions, grief. Her resume is extensive. She is the stuff. She's worked with so many people working through the trauma of life and being the best versions of themselves. Guess what? Let's Talk America podcast wants you to be the best version of yourselves. I'm no expert on therapy, but I do believe by staying informed, you're the best person you can be. Engagement is key. Knowing who you are is key. And staying informed of the latest current events and the latest news and the latest life hacks to make you awesome is out there. Stay connected to us, everyone. I really appreciate all of the feedback tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Blended families is the American way. We know that. We may not have planned it this way, but this is the life we're going to thrive in right now. And as Miss Jones said, not just to survive, but we're here to thrive as well. Thank you, Vicki, for the comment, the final comment taking us out. Awesome topic, ladies. Good night. Thank you so much. We appreciate you all. Stay with us. We have more information coming your way. We've got a show coming on something that matters to everybody. You're talking about your health. We're talking about menopause and premenopause. Men, do not run away because you've got partners, you got moms, you got sisters. We're going to talk about that with a top-notch medical doctor coming up soon in a few weeks. Stay with us. Let's Talk America Radio podcast. I was real talk for real people, and that's you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Miss Jones. Keep it going. We love each and every one of you. Share this episode.